The Superman curse when the hero becomes tragedy. Based on real stories. Not all terror comes from fiction. The golden Los Angeles sun poured through the archives room of the Los Angeles Times when I found the first clue, a yellowed clipping from 1959, forgotten among police dossiers. The photo showed a man with a severe expression in an open casket, George Reeves, the first to wear the mantle in a successful production, the first to feel its inexplicable weight. I wasn't supposed to be there. I wasn't supposed to know. But when you research Hollywood urban legends long enough, certain patterns begin to emerge. Too many coincidences to be coincidences. Too many tragedies following the same dark path. I reached out to touch the clipping. The light flickered. Just a second of darkness. When it returned, the photo had imperceptibly changed. Now, Reeves's corpse seemed to be looking directly at me. A silent warning. This is how I began to unearth what some call the Superman curse. An invisible force that seems to pursue those who dare to personify the ultimate ideal of the American hero. An entity made of fame, expectation, and something older, deeper. Something that doesn't want certain symbols to be embodied by mere mortals. What I discovered cannot be explained by conventional logic. What I discovered made me question the nature of reality, fame, and the hidden price of public worship. This is a story about fallen heroes. About a symbol that may be demanding human sacrifices. About how sometimes the characters we create can begin to create their own rules. This is the investigation of the Superman curse. And, like all true curses, to know it is also to risk attracting it. The story begins like many American legends, at the height of the Great Depression, 1938, a world desperate for hope, for something to believe in. That's when two young Jewish men from Cleveland, Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster, created what would become the first great superhero, Superman. He wasn't just a character, he was a manifesto, an immigrant from another world who embodied everything America wanted to be: strong, just, infallible. A being of unimaginable power who chose to use that power for good. A promise that the weak would be protected, that there would always be someone to save us. In no time, Superman became more than a success. He became a living myth, a secular religion. Children slept with his image beside their beds, like a protective saint. Adults found in him an ideal to aspire to. But what happens when we try to give life to a myth? What happens when we ask mortal men to embody something that, by definition, should not be able to exist in our world? This is where the whispers about the curse begin. The theory is simple and terrifying. Superman is not just a character. He's an archetype, a thought form, an egregore fed by decades of collective worship. And like all powerful supernatural forces, he does not easily accept being tamed, controlled, or personified. Those who try to physically become Superman seem to provoke some kind of cosmic reaction, a correction from the universe, as if something very ancient and very powerful were saying, "You can admire him, you can dream of him, but you cannot become him." The first victims were small, anonymous. Theater actors who wore the blue and red suit for children's performances and suffered inexplicable accidents. Stuntmen who performed Superman feats and ended up hospitalized. Isolated incidents that, viewed together, formed a disturbing pattern. But it was with George Reeves that the curse began to show its true nature, its true power, and its merciless thirst for sacrifice. Hollywood, 1951. George Reeves was an actor with a moderate career when he agreed to play Superman in the television series Adventures of Superman. What should have been just another role transformed into a cultural phenomenon. For millions of American children, George Reeves wasn't an actor playing a character. He was Superman. The stories are legendary. Children trying to test his powers, throwing themselves at him during public appearances, shouting, "Shoot me, I'm Superman." Reeves began wearing a bulletproof vest under his costume after rumors circulated about gangsters wanting to test if he was truly invulnerable. Producers demanded that he maintain exemplary conduct in public. No smoking, drinking, or inappropriate behavior. "You're a role model for America's children," they said. "You're Superman now." Gradually, the actor's identity began to be consumed by the character. Reeves complained to close friends that he couldn't get serious roles anymore. "Nobody wants to see Superman crying in a drama," directors would say. "Nobody wants to see Superman as a villain." Success had become a prison, and George Reeves, the mortal man behind the Man of Steel, was beginning to disappear. In his last interviews, there's an empty look in his eyes, a mechanical smile, as if something was being drained from him, slowly, without anyone noticing, as if Superman was, somehow, feeding on George Reeves. Then came the night of June 16, 1959. Reeves was at his home in Benedict Canyon, Los Angeles. There was a small gathering with friends. Drinks were flowing. Plans were being discussed. Reeves was 45 years old and, for the first time in a long time, seemed to have hope for the future. The series had been canceled. He had projects as a director, a marriage planned with Leonore Lemon. Around 1:20 a.m., Reeves went up to his bedroom, complaining of a headache. The guests continued the party downstairs. At 1:59 a.m., a gunshot echoed through the house. The police found George Reeves dead in his bed. A single .30 caliber Luger bullet had gone through his head. The gun was on the floor near his feet. No suicide note. No explanation. The official verdict? Suicide. Case closed. But the details never made sense. There was no powder residue on Reeves's hands. Witnesses reported sounds of a struggle before the shot. And more disturbing, Reeves had been found naked in bed, but the gun had fallen at an impossible distance for someone who had just shot himself. Alternative theories proliferated. Murder ordered by Eddie Mannix, MGM executive whose wife Toni had had an affair with Reeves. Accidental death during a game of Russian roulette. Or something more sinister. Leonore Lemon allegedly told guests moments before the shot, "He's going to kill himself." How could she have known? In his last public appearance, Reeves had said something equally disturbing. Being Superman is assuming a terrible responsibility. Reeves's closest friends never accepted the suicide theory. George had plans, they insisted. He was finally free from the role. Why would he kill himself now? Perhaps because he would never be truly free. Perhaps because by personifying Superman for so long, George Reeves had awakened something that would not rest until it claimed its tribute. The pattern was established. The first Superman had fallen. The curse had proven its power. And it was only just beginning. After George Reeves's death, there was a period of relative calm, as if the entity, the force, whatever was behind the curse, had withdrawn to absorb its first major victim. Superman continued in the pages of comic books, continued as an animated cartoon, but no one else tried to embody him physically for almost 2 decades. It was a period of dormancy, of incubation, as if the curse was just waiting, gaining strength. During this period, strange occurrences surrounded small Superman-related productions. Kirk Alyn, who had played Superman in film serials of the 1940s before Reeves, began reporting recurring nightmares. Dreams where he flew higher and higher, unable to stop, until the air became thin and he suffocated in the vacuum of space. Alyn never secured significant roles after Superman. His career evaporated. Decades later, he would end his days in a nursing home, suffering from Alzheimer's, unable to recognize his own image on screens or remember that he had once been the Man of Steel. At DC Comics publishing houses, employees reported inexplicable phenomena. Superman drawings that seemed to subtly change overnight, editors who developed sudden and intense fear of heights, writers who repeatedly dreamed of a man in a red cape, his back turned, floating above their beds. In 1978, after this long period of latency, the curse found a new host, A young and talented actor ready to take Superman to heights never before imagined. Christopher Reeve, strong, charismatic, with the perfect physique and face. The new Superman had arrived, and with him, the curse awakened from its long sleep. "You'll believe a man can fly." This was the slogan for the 1978 film Superman the Movie, and under Richard Donner's direction with Christopher Reeve in the lead role, we believed. The film revolutionized special effects, transcended the superhero genre, became a cultural event, and at the center of it all was Reeve, a relatively unknown actor who transformed overnight into the definitive incarnation of Superman. The perfection of the casting was eerie. As Clark Kent, Reeve was clumsy, shy, almost invisible, a transformation achieved only with posture and performance, without makeup or effects. As Superman, he was noble, powerful, majestic, the perfect duality. Critics and fans agreed. Christopher Reeve wasn't just playing Superman. Somehow, he had become Superman. The success was overwhelming. Reeve starred in 4 films as the Man of Steel. He became one of the most recognizable actors in the world. His face merged with that of the hero in the collective imagination. Entire generations grew up seeing Christopher Reeve as the personification of strength, goodness, invulnerability. His castmates noticed something strange in his transformation. Margot Kidder, who played Lois Lane, said in an interview, "When he put on the suit, something changed. It wasn't just posture. It was as if another presence occupied his body." Reeve felt it too. In his memoirs, he wrote, "There were moments on set wearing the suit when I felt something different. An energy, as if the character had its own will." The curse, as always, began to work subtly. Reeve suffered from chronic back pain due to the flying harnesses. He had a serious glider accident in 1988, where a fall nearly killed him, a dark omen of what was to come. After the Superman films ended, Reeve, like George Reeves before him, struggled to free himself from association with the character. He made smaller films, stage plays, trying to prove his worth as a versatile actor. But to the public, he remained Superman. Then came May 27th, 1995, a sunny, ordinary day in Culpeper, Virginia. Reeve was participating in an equestrian competition. He was an experienced rider. The horse Eastern Express was reliable. The obstacle ahead simple. Nothing indicated danger. And then the inexplicable. The horse stopped abruptly before the obstacle. Something it had never done before. Something witnesses described as completely out of character for the animal. Reeve was thrown forward. His head hit the barrier. The first 2 cervical vertebrae broke. In an instant, Christopher Reeve, the man who personified supreme physical strength, was quadriplegic, unable to move anything below the neck, unable even to breathe without assistance. "I think this is the cruelest joke in the universe," said a paramedic at the scene. "Superman can't walk anymore." The symmetry was too disturbing to be coincidence. The man who flew as Superman now couldn't even stand. The symbol of physical strength now depended on machines for every breath. The icon of invulnerability now was the personification of human fragility. It was as if some cosmic force was sending a message, a brutal reminder of the limits of humanity, of the consequences of trying to personify the divine. Christopher Reeve lived 9 more years after the accident. He became a tireless advocate for stem cell research, directed films from his wheelchair, showed a courage that many considered truly heroic. But the curse wasn't finished with him. On October 10, 2004, Reeve went into cardiac arrest after treatment for an infection. He died the next day at the age of 52. The second great incarnation of Superman had fallen, and he would not be the last. The curse now seemed to be gaining strength, expanding its reach. It was no longer content with just the lead actors. It began to touch everyone around the symbol. Like all genuinely supernatural phenomena, the Superman curse began to show patterns that defied rational explanation. It wasn't just about the actors who wore the mantle anymore. It was about anyone who entered its orbit. Like ripples in a lake, expanding from a central point, touching ever more distant shores. Margot Kidder, the iconic Lois Lane from Christopher Reeve's films, was next. Her life after Superman was marked by extreme ups and downs. In 1996, she had a public mental breakdown that shocked Hollywood. She was found living in a backyard, hiding in bushes, paranoid, believing someone was trying to kill her. "There was something following me," she said afterward. "Something I can't explain." Kidder was diagnosed with bipolar disorder. For years, she fought against her inner demons. And then in May 2018, she was found dead in her Montana home. The official cause: suicide by alcohol and drug overdose. The pattern continued. Lee Quigley, who played Baby Kal-El, Superman, in the 1978 film, died at age 14 in 1991 from solvent inhalation, a tragic and premature death. Richard Pryor, who starred in Superman 3, developed multiple sclerosis shortly after filming. In memoirs published before his death in 2005, Pryor wrote, "Sometimes, in my worst moments, I think it was that damn movie. As if some negative energy had come out of that production and followed me." Marlon Brando, who played Jor-El, Superman's father, lived through a succession of tragedies after the film. His son Christian was convicted of manslaughter. His daughter Cheyenne committed suicide. Brando himself became increasingly isolated, becoming almost unrecognizable in his final years. Even people with more tenuous connections seemed to be affected. John Hames Newton, who briefly played Superboy in the TV series in the late 80s, saw his career and personal life crumble after leaving the role. Producers, writers, and directors reported inexplicable phenomena during filming. Equipment that worked perfectly until used in scenes with Superman. Inexplicable accidents on sets. Recordings that revealed strange voices when played back. In 1993, during the production of the series, Lois and Clark: The New Adventures of Superman, crew members found a strange symbol drawn on the back of Superman's suit. No one admitted to putting it there. The symbol resembled something between an ancient Kryptonian sign, from comic book mythology, and a real occult symbol. A consultant on paranormal phenomena, secretly brought to the set, allegedly said, "This is not someone's prank. This is a mark, a channel." The implication was clear and disturbing. What if the Superman curse wasn't just a series of coincidences? What if it was something conscious? Something that used the Superman symbol as a portal to our world? This theory gained strength with each new tragedy, with each new pattern impossible to ignore. The Superman curse seemed to have its own intelligence, its own will, and apparently, it had no intention of stopping. The turn of the millennium brought no relief. If anything, the curse seemed to be adapting, evolving, finding new ways to manifest its power. In 2006, Brandon Routh took up the mantle in Superman Returns. The film was explicitly positioned as a tribute to Christopher Reeve's legacy. Routh resembled Reeves so much it was almost supernatural, as if the character itself was choosing physical avatars with specific characteristics. Routh didn't suffer a physical tragedy. Instead, his career inexplicably collapsed. As he himself described in later interviews, "It was as if a door had closed, not just for Superman but for everything, as if something didn't want me to succeed after that role." Routh would eventually find work again in smaller TV series, but the promise of stardom had vanished, as if the curse had recalibrated its approach. Instead of physical destruction, it now opted for professional destruction. And then came Henry Cavill. In 2013, he became Superman in Man of Steel, starting a new era for the character. Young, athletic, charismatic, he seemed destined to define Superman for a new generation. The signs began subtly. During filming, Cavill suffered a knee injury that nearly halted production. Frequent accidents occurred on set. A technician died during the construction of a set, an accident classified as unexplained circumstances. More disturbing still, Autumn Snyder, director Zack Snyder's daughter, committed suicide during the production of Justice League, forcing the director to abandon the project. It was as if the curse was again expanding its reach, touching not just the lead actor but everyone around him. Cavill's career as Superman, initially promised to last for years, ended abruptly in 2022. After publicly announcing his return to the role, something he had desired for years, Cavill was suddenly dismissed with no clear explanation. As he described, "It was like having the rug pulled out from under my feet, something I couldn't comprehend." In the most recent television productions, the pattern held. Tyler Hoechlin, playing Superman in Superman and Lois, suffered a serious back injury right at the start of filming. a sinister echo of Christopher Reeves' problems decades earlier. The show's filming was interrupted multiple times by inexplicable accidents. Electrical failures when Superman's suit was on set. Equipment that worked perfectly in tests, but failed during filming. A sound technician from the production described something particularly disturbing. Sometimes when we were recording scenes with Superman, we would pick up something in the low frequencies. A kind of hum, almost like a voice, but not exactly. When we isolated that sound and sped it up, it sounded like someone saying, "Doesn't belong here." The latest significant cinematic incarnation, in Batman vs. Superman, brought its own wave of anomalies. Ben Affleck, who played Batman in the film, developed an alcohol dependency that almost destroyed his career. It was after that film, he said in interviews, something changed, as if a darkness had entered my life. And now, as new productions are planned, many in Hollywood whisper about the curse. Actors who secretly refuse to test for the role. Agents who advise their clients to stay away from the character. A high-ranking producer who asked to remain anonymous told me during this investigation, "Every major studio in Hollywood has a dossier on the Superman curse. Nobody talks openly about it, but everyone knows. Everyone takes precautions. Special insurance, clauses in contracts. Some even consult specialists in other fields before starting a production." When I asked what kind of specialists, he just smiled nervously and said, "The kind you consult when you're dealing with something that shouldn't exist." The question persists like an echo in an empty cave. What exactly is the Superman curse? What force drives this endless chain of tragedies? During my investigation, I delved into theories ranging from the mundane to the metaphysical, each offering a possible explanation for the inexplicable. The most prosaic theory is naturally coincidence, statistical chance. Thousands of people work on Superman-related productions over the decades. Some tragedies are inevitable. Our minds, programmed to find patterns, connect dots that perhaps aren't really connected. But the deeper I dig, the less satisfying this explanation becomes. The patterns are too specific, the symmetries too disturbing, the repetition of certain motifs, falls, paralysis, suicide, too consistent. A second theory, favored by psychologists, involves the psychological pressure of playing a cultural icon, the crushing weight of expectations, the terror of personifying the unattainable ideal. As a psychologist specializing in celebrity culture explained to me, when you play Jesus or Superman, you become a vessel for the collective unconscious projections of perfection. It's a burden that few can bear without suffering psychological damage. This theory helps explain the mental breakdowns, the identity crises, the sensation reported by many actors of being consumed by the role. But it fails to explain the physical accidents, the premature deaths, the patterns that extend beyond the protagonists. This is where we enter darker territory, more controversial. In 1925, long before the creation of Superman, the occultist Dion Fortune wrote about thought forms, psychic entities created and sustained by collective mental energy. Jung would call them archetypes of the collective unconscious. In the esoteric tradition, they are known as egregores, psychic constructs that gain a kind of independent consciousness when fed by sufficient attention and emotional energy. What is Superman if not the definitive thought form of American culture? A symbol fed by billions of minds over decades. A receptacle for our deepest collective aspirations. A modern god in the most literal sense. This theory suggests that Superman is not just a character, but a semi-conscious entity from the psychic plane. A powerful egregore that, like all gods, demands tributes from those who dare to physically personify it. An anthropologist I interviewed, specialized in the intersection between mythology and pop culture, offered a fascinating perspective. All cultures have figures that should not be casually impersonated. Gods, spirits, heroic figures. In many indigenous traditions, wearing the mask of a god during a ritual literally means being temporarily possessed by that entity. Perhaps our technological culture has forgotten this, but the metaphysical principles remain. When an actor wears Superman, he is invoking forces that he doesn't fully understand. This view finds disturbing parallels in production accounts. Richard Donner, director of Superman the movie, observed something peculiar about Christopher Reeve. There were moments when he was in the suit, and a look passed through his eyes. It wasn't Chris anymore. It was something else looking through him. More recently, Henry Cavill described a similar sensation. When you put on the suit for the first time, something changes. It's not just psychological. It's almost as if the suit has its own memory. Perhaps the key lies in the nature of Superman himself. He is, by definition, more than human, more than a being beyond the physical limitations of humanity. When mortals try to personify him, perhaps they activate a cosmic correction, a violent and relentless reminder of the boundaries we shouldn't cross. As a researcher of paranormal phenomena told me, there are things we shouldn't try to be, limits we shouldn't try to transcend. Superman represents exactly that kind of forbidden transcendence. The most disturbing theory of all emerged during an interview with a former studio executive who worked on several Superman productions. Under condition of anonymity, he revealed, there was an incident in 1986 during the pre-production of a Superman film that was never completed. One of the casting directors found an ancient manuscript in the house he had bought in Burbank. The manuscript contained a symbol that resembled Superman's S, but from a publication that preceded the creation of the character by decades. The manuscript spoke of an ancient entity that fed on human worship, that assumed forms that inspired devotion, that punished those who tried to claim its power. This story, as fantastic as it may seem, finds echoes in accounts from Joe Shuster, co-creator of Superman, who allegedly told close friends that the design of the Superman symbol came to him in a dream. "I didn't create it," he supposedly said. "I saw it, as if it was waiting to be discovered." Whatever the truth behind the curse, one thing is certain: its power has not diminished. And as new films are planned, new actors prepare to wear the red cape, the question remains, who will be the next to feel its touch? The Superman curse is not limited to major productions or famous names. Like a shadow spreading through twilight, it touches lives that rarely reach the spotlight. These are the marginal stories, the obscure cases, the whispers that Hollywood prefers to silence. Robert Maxwell, producer of the original Adventures of Superman series with George Reeves, died mysteriously in 1957. His body was found floating in the ocean. Suicide, the authorities declared. But close friends insisted that Maxwell was excited about new projects, that there were no signs of depression, that something didn't make sense. Siegel and Shuster, the original creators of Superman, experienced their own forms of curse. After selling the rights to the character for a mere $130 in 1938, they spent decades in legal battles, often in poverty, while their character generated billions. Shuster eventually became nearly blind. Siegel suffered multiple heart attacks. Both passed away without ever fully regaining control over their creation. During a rare interview in 1975, Shuster said something intriguing. "Sometimes I feel that we didn't create him, that he already existed somewhere, waiting, and now he has a life of his own, completely beyond our control. There are the stuntmen, the anonymous men who performed dangerous acrobatics in films and series. A disturbing pattern emerges. Injury rates significantly higher than in other productions. Inexplicable accidents. Equipment that worked perfectly in tests, but failed during filming of Superman scenes. Christopher Lawford, stuntman in Superman 4, suffered a fall when a cable inexplicably broke. The cable was checked minutes before, the stunt coordinator insisted. It was new, rated to support 5 times the necessary weight. There was no logical explanation for the break. Lawford survived but was permanently disabled. Years later, in a documentary that never aired, he made an enigmatic statement. "It wasn't an accident. It was like something pulled me down, as if gravity suddenly became stronger, just around me." The special effects technicians tell their own strange stories. In 1978, during the pioneering flight effects of Superman the movie, 3 technicians independently reported the same disturbing dream. A man in a red cape hovering over their beds at night, watching them as they slept. His face, curiously, was never Christopher Reeves. It was something indefinable, something other. In more recent productions, digital effects have largely replaced mechanical techniques. But even there, anomalies persist. An animator from Man of Steel described how computer files related to Superman's flight scenes corrupted at inexplicably high rates. It was as if something was interfering with the data, he explained, specifically with these scenes, never with other parts of the film. On a particularly disturbing occasion, a scene render had glitches that created, for a few frames, a distortion in Cavill's face. When frozen, one of the technicians swore that the distorted face was no longer Cavill's, but something not entirely human. There are also the fans. Ordinary people whose lives were touched by the curse in more subtle, but no less disturbing ways. In 1988, a 9-year-old boy in Fresno, California, jumped from his roof wearing a homemade cape, convinced he could fly like his hero. Miraculously, he survived. But the interesting part was what he said afterward. He was there, Superman, hovering in the air, saying I could fly too. A childish hallucination? Probably, but similar cases occurred across the country, following strange patterns. More disturbingly, in several cases, the children described Superman in an identical manner, not as a version from the films or comics, but as something older, with a face that changed when they tried to remember it. A memorabilia collector in Seattle reported inexplicable phenomena around specific Superman-related items. Clocks that stopped when placed near certain artifacts. Photographs that showed anomalies when certain items were photographed. Orbs of light, distortions, indistinct figures in the background. I'm not superstitious, he insisted, but there's something about certain pieces, especially the older ones, the first comics, the original costumes. It's as if they retain some kind of energy. A theoretical physics professor I consulted suggested an unconventional explanation. Certain symbols, when they assume sufficient meaning for large populations, can theoretically create disturbances in the quantum field. It's speculative, of course, but not completely outside the realm of possibility. These marginal stories, however anecdotal they may be, suggest something important. The curse is not just a series of isolated tragedies involving celebrities. It's a wider, more diffuse phenomenon, like an invisible force field emanating from the symbol itself, affecting everything it touches to varying degrees. As Superman exists simultaneously on multiple levels, as a fictional character, as a cultural symbol, as a psychological archetype, and perhaps as something more, his curse also seems to operate in multiple dimensions, touching lives in ways we are only beginning to understand. The power of the Superman curse lies partially in its secrecy, in the silence that surrounds it, in the whispers that rarely reach the surface. Like all dark forces, it thrives in the shadows, in the lack of recognition, in denial. Today, as new Superman productions are planned, a question hangs like a charged cloud. What does it mean to consciously confront the curse? To recognize it as real, or at least as a real possibility? James Gunn, responsible for the new era of Superman in cinema, was indirectly questioned about the curse in a recent interview. His response was carefully neutral. I deeply respect the history of this character and all who have played him. Each project carries its own set of challenges. Sources within the production, however, reveal a different story. Intensified safety measures, unconventional consultants discreetly hired, specific clauses in insurance policies that mention inexplicable phenomena, a seriousness that goes beyond the normal precautions of a major studio. The new actor chosen for the role, David Corenswet, apparently participated in a special orientation session before officially accepting the role. The exact content of this session remains confidential, but sources indicate that it included a briefing on the history of the curse and potential spiritual considerations of the role. For the first time, it seems that Hollywood is facing the possibility of the curse openly, at least behind the scenes. It's a belated recognition of something that has been whispered for decades. Does this more conscious approach offer hope? Can the curse be mitigated by awareness, neutralized by recognition? Or does the simple act of recognizing it only strengthen its power? The answer may depend on the fundamental nature of the curse. If it is an egregore, a thought form fed by collective belief, then conscious recognition can paradoxically both strengthen it and offer tools to contain it. As a practitioner of esoteric traditions explained to me, once you recognize an egregore, you gain a certain power over it. Not to destroy it, that would be impossible for something as powerful as Superman, but to negotiate with it, to establish boundaries, to define terms. This is the path that some modern productions seem to be following. Subtle rituals incorporated into the filming process. moments of recognition and respect before important scenes, an approach that treats Superman not just as intellectual property, but as a living force that deserves consideration. Others take more direct precautions. Insurance for Superman productions now often includes specific clauses covering inexplicable accidents. Specialized psychologists are kept on standby for lead actors. Some studios even employ energy consultants, individuals who claim to be able to detect and mitigate metaphysical disturbances in filming environments. As strange as all this may seem, it reflects a shift in collective consciousness, a willingness to consider the inexplicable, to recognize that perhaps, just perhaps, there are forces beyond our rational understanding that deserve respect. Meanwhile, the big question remains: will the next incarnation of Superman escape the curse? Or will it just add another chapter to its dark history? What is Superman, really? On the surface, he's a fictional character, a commercial product, intellectual property generating billions in revenue. More deeply, he's a cultural symbol, an American icon that transcends national boundaries, a representation of the highest ideals of justice, strength, and compassion. Deeper still, he's a psychological archetype, the ultimate hero, the embodiment of humanity's collective unconscious aspirations, what Jung would call a manifestation of the self, and perhaps at the most fundamental level, he's something even older, an echo of solar myths that date back to the dawn of civilization. Apollo, Mithras, Horus, the god hero who comes from the skies, endowed with powers beyond human comprehension to save humanity from itself. In each of these layers, Superman carries a weight, a burden, a potential that can be both inspiring and destructive. The Superman curse, viewed through this lens, becomes more than a series of tragic coincidences. It becomes a manifestation of the cosmic price of trying to embody the divine, of trying to bring into the physical realm something that belongs to the realm of myth. As humans, we create gods in our image, infusing them with our highest ideals and aspirations. But what happens when we try to reverse this process? When a mortal tries to become the god we created? Perhaps that's what the curse really is. A cosmic correction. A relentless reminder of the limits of human embodiment. An assertion that some boundaries should not be crossed. Christopher Reeve, in an interview given years after his accident, reflected, "Superman represents what we could be if we weren't afraid." Maybe that's the real challenge. Not trying to be super, but facing our own limitations with courage. There is profound wisdom in these words. An acceptance of the human condition that perhaps is the true antidote to the curse. Because in the end, what Superman really teaches us is not to aspire to invulnerability, but to embrace our vulnerability with grace. Not about flying above humanity, but about being rooted in it, with all its fragilities and imperfections. Perhaps the true lesson of the curse is this: real heroism is not in transcending our humanity, but in fully inhabiting it, in accepting our limitations, our failures, our mortality, and yet still choosing kindness, courage, hope. This is the lesson that George Reeves didn't live to learn, that Christopher Reeve eventually embraced, finding a new kind of heroism in his condition, that each new incarnation of Superman must confront in one way or another. And as new generations continue to be inspired by the symbol of the S, as new actors take up the mantle, as the myth continues to evolve, the curse remains, not just as a dark warning, but as a paradoxical reminder. True power lies not in being invulnerable, but in accepting our vulnerability. True flight is not in escaping gravity, but in finding meaning within its constraints. True heroism lies not in being more than human, but in being perfectly, completely, gloriously human. It's a lesson worth a life, worth a career, worth facing the curse. Because in the end, this is what all these men who wore the cape discovered, each in their own way. We cannot be Superman, but perhaps, just perhaps, it's enough to be human. I owe a confession to my reader. This investigation was not merely academic for me. It became personal in ways I never anticipated. Since I began researching the Superman curse, strange events have occurred. Small at first, emails disappearing, interview recordings with inexplicable interference exactly at the most revealing moments, vivid and disturbing dreams of falling, of interrupted flight. On 3 occasions, I woke in the middle of the night with the distinct sensation that someone was in the room, watching. a presence that seemed to bring with it the subtle odor of ozone, the smell of air after lightning, the smell that, according to fiction, accompanies Superman's landings and takeoffs. During the writing of this article, I suffered two inexplicable accidents. One involving a fall downstairs that, by inches, did not result in spinal injury. Another involving an electrical short circuit that occurred, curiously, only when I was editing the chapter about Christopher Reeve. Coincidences? Probably. The result of a mind saturated with stories of tragedy and curse? Possibly. But part of me, the part that has spent years investigating the shadowy spaces between the explicable and the inexplicable, is not so certain, because if there is a true Superman curse, it would not limit itself to those who wear the cape. It would extend its shadows to those who investigate it, to those who try to expose it to the light. If you are reading this, the curse is now also part of your consciousness. A small fragment of it now lives in your mind. And while I don't believe that mere knowledge is enough to attract its full power, I suggest a certain caution, a moment of respect for the unknown, for the inexplicable, for forces beyond our comprehension that perhaps shape our world more than we would like to admit. Because in the end, the Superman curse reminds us of an ancient and uncomfortable truth. There are things in this world that we don't fully understand, boundaries that perhaps we shouldn't cross, and symbols whose power goes far beyond ink on paper or pixels on a screen. Meanwhile, the movies continue to be made, the actors continue to wear the cape, and somewhere in the depths of the collective unconscious, or perhaps in some realm more literal than we would like to believe, a presence watches, waiting for the next Superman, waiting for the next sacrifice.
There are legends that are born of lies, but there are those that are born of truth. The difference is that when they are real, you never sleep easy again.